There are people who don't just feel life, they absorb it. They walk into a room and instantly sense the tension no one speaks about. They hear the words that weren't said. They notice the shifting tone, the subtle silence, the almost invisible change in someone's eyes. And even though they carry this awareness like a gift, it often feels more like a quiet ache, a life lived with the volume turned up too high. Not because they chose it, but because somewhere along the way, sensitivity became the only way to stay safe in a world that rarely slows down enough to understand them. There is a heaviness that settles inside people who feel too deeply, a quiet pressure that rarely has language. It's the weight of noticing everything before anyone else does. The mood shifts, the unspoken resentment, the smile that doesn't reach someone's eyes, the tension hiding between two people who won't admit they're hurting. Most never realize how early this began for you, how feeling became a kind of silent responsibility. Before you even understood emotions, you were already tracking them. Before you knew what anxiety was, you were absorbing the kind that didn't belong to you. It shaped you gently, then relentlessly, until your inner world carried more weight than your outer one ever showed. And over time, the world mistook your depth for fragility. But you knew the truth. Feeling everything wasn't weakness, it was survival, disguised as sensitivity. Sensitivity rarely appears out of nowhere. It grows in the shadows of the moments you were taught, silently, subtly, to pay attention in ways other children never had to. Maybe it began with a parent whose moods were unpredictable, so you learned to read the air before you entered a room. Maybe it came from a home where love depended on your ability to anticipate someone else's needs. So you stayed alert, watching for the slightest change that might shift the atmosphere. Or maybe it wasn't chaos at all. Maybe it was the absence of warmth, the quietness of a home where emotions weren't spoken, forcing you to sense what was never said out loud. These were the early lessons: to notice, to monitor, to absorb. Not because you were naturally too emotional, but because your environment required a level of awareness far beyond your age. And long before you grew into yourself, you were already living with antennae tuned to the slightest tremor in another person's tone. A skill born not from choice, but from adaptation. There comes a point when awareness stops being something you do and becomes something your body performs automatically. A quiet rewiring, a subtle conditioning, a nervous system trained to listen for storms long before they form. You learned to pick up on danger before it became visible. Not physical danger, but emotional instability. Disappointment, withdrawal, disapproval. The cold shift in someone who suddenly feels distant. Your body memorized these cues long before your mind had words for them. A slight change in rhythm, a heavier silence, a softer "I'm fine" that didn't match the energy underneath. This vigilance wasn't paranoia, it was protection, the kind that helped you stay one step ahead of the emotions that were too overwhelming to endure unprepared. And eventually, your nervous system forgot how to rest. It learned to stay half awake, half guarded, always scanning the horizon for storms that might not even come, but once existed often enough to leave a permanent imprint. This is how sensitivity becomes instinct, not as a gift first, but as survival's earliest language.
People call it intuition. They call it empathy. They call it emotional intelligence. But they never see the price your body pays for carrying that level of awareness. Because reading a room isn't passive for you. It's work. Invisible work. Energetic work. The kind that drains you before you even realize why you're tired. You don't just observe people, you feel them. Their disappointment, their irritation, their loneliness, their unspoken frustrations that leak through the cracks of their composure. And even when you don't want to absorb it, your nervous system takes it in anyway, like a sponge that never learned how to stay dry. Most people can walk into a space and simply exist, but you walk in and unconsciously begin balancing the emotional temperature, softening yourself, adjusting your tone, shaping your energy to make sure everything stays stable enough for you to feel safe within it. And that's the cost no one notices. That sensitivity requires constant calibration, a never-ending effort to maintain harmony in places that never learn to hold it themselves.
Some sensitivities begin in childhood. Others begin long before you were even born. There are families where emotions were never spoken, only felt, passed down quietly like an heirloom of unprocessed pain. Homes where people survived by anticipating each other, by staying hyper-aware, by reading moods instead of words. You may not realize it, but your sensitivity might not just be yours. It may be the imprint of generations who learned to navigate instability through silence, alertness, and emotional precision. Maybe your mother learned to keep the peace by noticing the shift in someone's breathing. Maybe your father survived by studying expressions instead of trusting promises. Maybe your grandparents built entire lives around managing tension that no one ever acknowledged. These patterns don't disappear. They travel. They shape the way bodies respond to the world. They teach children how to survive without ever being explicitly taught. So when people say you're too sensitive, they don't understand. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It is the evolution of someone who comes from a long line of people who had to feel deeply just to stay safe. It was never too much. It was inherited wisdom the world forgot how to value. Somewhere along the way, the world convinced you that your depth was a problem, that feeling intensely made you dramatic, that noticing everything made you overthink, that caring too deeply made you fragile. So you learned to shrink, to mute your reactions, to hold your breath when your emotions rose too quickly, to apologize for the very instincts that kept you safe. But the truth is this: people who call you too much are often people who feel too little, or who were never taught how to hold emotional depth without fearing it. Your intensity didn't overwhelm them. It exposed them. It revealed the parts of themselves they had long learned to silence. Your honesty made their repression louder. Your awareness highlighted the places they refused to look, so they labeled you instead. They packaged your depth as inconvenience, your intuition as exaggeration, your pain as sensitivity. But feeling fully has never been a flaw. It is simply inconvenient for those who cannot meet you where you are. You were never too much. You were simply surrounded by people who had never learned how to receive someone who feels life in high resolution. Outwardly, you appear composed, measured, even serene. But beneath the surface, your mind races. Every word, every glance, every subtle shift in tone is cataloged, analyzed, and stored. You've become a quiet actor, performing stability
while your inner world hums with heightened awareness. This mask isn't deception, it's protection. A buffer between the intensity you carry and the expectations of a world that often misunderstands it. You've learned to temper your expressions, to moderate your gestures, to soften your voice when the storm inside threatens to spill. And the irony is cruel. The calmer you appear on the outside, the more intense the turbulence on the inside. It's a dance you perform daily, keeping the world at ease while containing yourself, carrying the unspoken weight of every interaction, every unacknowledged emotion, every subtle shift no one else notices. This mask of calm becomes both shield and cage, a barrier that keeps others comfortable while silently reminding you that your depth is too much for most to bear.
There's a quiet danger in living so attuned to others that you forget yourself. Every thought, every feeling, every need is filtered through the lens of someone else's comfort. You adjust, you compensate, you soften, until the reflection staring back at you in the mirror feels foreign. Hyper-awareness, once a survival skill, slowly becomes self-erasure. You abandon your own rhythms to match the tempo of those around you. You suppress your instincts to avoid friction. You sacrifice small desires, then larger ones, until the person you were meant to be becomes a faint echo. And yet, you barely notice, because feeling deeply has conditioned you to value others' ease over your own presence, to prioritize harmony over authenticity, to endure the slow erosion of your own boundaries in the name of connection. Self-abandonment is not dramatic, it is silent. A shadow that grows longer each day you forget to tend to the person who carries your name. And in that silence, you begin to ask, who am I when all I do is care for the spaces between others?
To feel deeply is often to feel alone, not because no one surrounds you, but because no one can reach the depth at which you live. You notice subtleties, sense unspoken pain, and carry invisible burdens that others will never recognize. Conversations skim the surface, while your mind maps the undercurrents. Laughter is enjoyed, yet tinged with awareness of sadness lurking behind smiles. This loneliness is subtle, almost invisible. It isn't dramatized, it isn't spoken of. It exists in the moments when you want to share, but the world cannot hear you. When you yearn for someone who truly feels what you feel, but find that most cannot match the intensity of your perception. And so the sensitive heart learns to retreat inward, finding solace in private spaces, in quiet thoughts, in the safe corners of your own mind. It is a solitude born not of rejection, but of depth, a reminder that to feel more than others is to exist in a space few can inhabit with you.
Your mind may try to rationalize, to explain, to move on. But your body holds what words cannot reach. Tension coiled in shoulders, a tightness in the chest, restless energy in the stomach. These are echoes of experiences your mind wanted to bury. Every suppressed emotion leaves a residue. Every moment you ignored your own needs for the sake of someone else is etched into the nervous system. Even now, it whispers, a tremor in the spine, a quickened heartbeat, a heaviness in your limbs. This somatic memory is subtle, insistent, unavoidable. It reminds you that sensitivity is not just a thought pattern, but a living, breathing imprint carried through years of survival. And sometimes it awakens without warning, a wave of anxiety when the room is empty, a pang of sadness in the middle of routine, a surge of restlessness in moments of calm. The body does not forget. It archives, it remembers, it pulses with the history of your care, your vigilance, your depth, even when the mind convinces you that it is safe to release. There comes a moment when feeling too much becomes unbearable. When absorbing the world's weight, anticipating every subtle shift, and containing every emotion finally overwhelms the self. And then, without ceremony, the body erects walls. A protective numbness spreads through the mind, muting the very sensations that once defined your depth. The intensity that once made life vivid now becomes exhausting, and the soul retreats into shadows where pain can no longer reach. This is not defeat, it is survival. A nervous system forced into self-preservation, creating awareness for quiet, connection for safety, sensitivity for silence. Yet in this numbness, there is grief. Grief for the parts of yourself you've had to hide. Grief for the empathy that now lies dormant. Grief for the energy you long to reclaim. And paradoxically, the numbness itself becomes a teacher, showing that even depth must pause. Even the most sensitive hearts need reprieve, and even the most attuned minds must learn to shelter their own. The fragments you tucked away for safety are not lost. They wait quietly, patient and persistent beneath layers of conditioning and self-abandonment. The part of you that laughs freely, that cries without apology, that speaks without fear, it still exists, even if it feels buried beneath years of careful modulation. Reclaiming it is not a dramatic transformation. It is a quiet, deliberate recognition that your depth is not something to suppress, but something to honor. Every step towards yourself requires courage. It means feeling what you once turned away from. It means listening to the whispers of your own needs. It means allowing your body and mind to synchronize again, to experience life without constant calculation, without preemptive protection. In this reclamation, there is tenderness, a slow, intimate awakening to the fullness of your own humanity. The parts you hid to survive begin to speak, and when you finally listen, you realize that what once endangered you now strengthens you. Your sensitivity is no longer a shield or a burden. It is a homecoming. For years, you may have punished yourself for feeling too much, for reacting too intensely, for noticing what others pretended not to see. But the truth is that sensitivity is not a flaw. It is not an error in your wiring. It is a profound awareness that few have the courage to bear. When you meet your own depth with compassion, the trembling, the heaviness, the overwhelm, they no longer feel like enemies. They become teachers, guides showing the edges of your heart, illuminating the parts of yourself that have long been hidden in shame. Compassion transforms your relationship with your own intensity. It turns the burden of hyper-awareness into a landscape of insight. It allows you to sit with your feelings without judgment, to honor your instincts without fear, and to recognize that the very traits you once scorned are the source of your authenticity. In this space,
Sensitivity is no longer too much. It is enough. It is whole. It is yours. There comes a moment when the storm within begins to settle, when the constant vigilance, the quiet masking, the hyper-awareness all soften into something spacious, tender, and alive. You start to feel without fear of judgment. You begin to trust that your intensity will not break the world, that your empathy will not drown you, that your depth is not a liability but a sanctuary. The soft rebirth is subtle. It is not fireworks or dramatic revelation. It is a quiet return to yourself, a gentle reclaiming of energy, of presence, of rhythm. You move through life aligned rather than surviving, attuned but no longer on high alert. And in this space, sensitivity transforms. It is no longer a burden. It is a source of clarity, connection, and grace. A gift you can finally inhabit fully, without apology, without shame, without exhaustion. The person who once felt too much now feels safely, deeply, wholly alive.